Well, welcome to another right to the point DIY video. This one's going to focus on lacing wood flooring together after you've removed a wall. You can see obviously here that I have removed a wall. This was a wall that existed between my dining room and my living room. And the wall basically opened up. There was about a 4-foot opening here, but of course, the wall's gone. That means I have a gap in the flooring. So we're going to get right to the point and walk you through a repair of this flooring that includes lacing the wood flooring together.
Okay, I also want to tell you the tools and materials that you're going to need for this job. In the power tools column, you will notice there's a lot of different power tools I used, including my table saw and a miter saw. Both of those were essential. The second one down, the oscillating multi-tool, was absolutely essential for me because of making the plunge cuts at the end of the boards. And this is a picture of the rigid Job Max tool that I utilized. But if you don't have that, you're going to have to make those cuts with a chisel, and it's going to take you a long time, and you're going to have to be really good with a chisel in order to make them nice and square. So just keep that in mind. Having the right tools is going to make the world of a difference and helping you to be able to do this job successfully. Again, it's no small task. This is a pretty significant job. So make sure you have the right tools, and you will find it will make this job go a lot easier.
Okay, so let's just take a look at how we have to do this repair and some of the realities of the challenges that you're faced with when you're trying to interlace together existing wood flooring. So you will notice, of course, this is where the wall was. And you can see here that we have a typical board. This board has the tongue on this side and the groove on this side. So here's the board, tongue, groove. Now, when they lay these, of course, most of you know, when you lay flooring, you start against the wall and you're going to have the tongue side against the wall. And as you lay a course, you interlock them together. So just to show you how that looks like, this is basically that board. They would lay a course all the way along. Then they would come with a new piece. And of course, they would nail it down through the bottom part of the groove. And then they would put the new piece against it, hold it down, and of course, again, nail through that bottom groove. Well, that's how they do that. Well, the challenge we have is, well, all these, and since I'm going to interlace these together, I'm going to have basically, it looks like it'll be like a jigsaw, like fingers, because I'm going to take certain pieces out. Well, all pieces I'll take out to a certain degree, but then you can't do what I just did. You can't interlace them together. So how do we go about doing that? Well, the solution for this is going to require, the hardest part really is taking the boards out. And then when you're putting the new boards in, you're going to have to do some things such as cutting out a certain part of the groove. So we're going to walk you through that. I'm just going to show it to you really quick, because once you learn how to do one, the rest come together. Okay, so I did the initial layout here of the first part of this seam. So I just want to talk it through what my thinking is. The first thing is you want it to look random. And so the blue lines basically outline all the pieces I'm going to be taking out, right? So anything you see here, like this piece here, all this here, anything other than where the blue is, that's what I'm going to be taking out, all right? Now in this case here, when there's a board that comes right up to here, I'm leaving that board. Same thing with this. Now you might say, well, how did you decide what you were going to take out and what not? Well, two things. First, randomness. The flooring itself, if you look over here and you can see the floors, there's seams, there's a seam here, 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 but it's totally random. And that's what you want here as well. You also don't want to have to take out a ton of material, but one of the mistakes made is people just finger it all the way evenly through this. That's almost going to stand out as much as if they had just replaced a strip down here. It's not really the best way to do it. So randomness is one. The other thing is I tried to make the seams where existing wood met the other piece I'm going to take out. If at all possible, you want to do that so you don't, like for instance, you see this one here is a seam here. Well, if I had cut it off here, then I'd have this short piece, so you don't want that. So I'm putting it down here. Now, I could go back to every seam if I wanted to, but that takes a lot of material out and it's not necessary. What you don't want is to leave just a little tiny piece where you're gonna do your seam. So if at all possible, try to cut it at where the seam is, but you don't have to, as long as there's not big or just little short pieces there. So randomness and seams and not leaving short pieces, that's part of the goal here when you do the layout. So I'm gonna continue to lay out all of the rest all the way to the wall before I start cutting. Okay, so I've completed the layout for this left side. And as you can see, again, random, and I tried to stay where there's actual seams already, but when I couldn't, I just tried to make sure that I wasn't leaving any small pieces, and for the most part that worked. I want to note that over here at the corner, I've got a couple of small pieces I'm putting in. Part of the reason for that is because I don't want to take it all the way back. I don't have to cut these baseboards all the way back. No one's really going to look there. I'm going to have chairs and stuff against there. You'd have to really look to see it. The other thing is this piece right here, you can see they've actually nailed this down. You can see where the nail holes are. So they nailed that down for some reason. It may be because that was a starter. I'm not really sure, but that's going to be a little bit more of a pain to take out. I got to be more careful with my saw blade. So anyways, I've got this side laid out. And I'm gonna now start the cutting process and removing the boards.
The first thing you need to do is score and then make the plunge cuts at the end of each board where you're going to be removing the old board and where the new one will be connecting. Now, a couple of things to note here. The first thing is use a square, just a regular flat square, and score the ends so you have a slight groove there in the existing floor where you're going to make the cut. Sometimes you'll have a seam there already and it will be able to cut no problem, but it's better to make that score if you do not. Secondly, if you'll note here, when you do make that cut, you're going to make that plunge cut slightly down at an angle where it kind of goes inward to the piece that you're leaving. And the reason you're going to do that is because when you put the new board in, we're going to cut that not totally flat either. We're going to cut that with a slight bevel on it. And that just means the ends of the boards are going to meet really nice. And you'll see that here later on when I show you how to do the cuts. But again, you're going to score each one. Make sure you use a square to make it square on each end. Score it with a utility knife and then use the plunge cut. And you will be tested on how good you are with your multi-tool. Just make sure that you do not hit the boards that you're going to be leaving on each side. Step 2 is where you're going to make 2 parallel circular saw cuts lengthwise along the pieces of the flooring that you're going to remove. Now the purpose of this is to take that piece out. It will slide up because you got the plunge cut taken out at the end, and that will allow you to now be able to have room to pry out the other 2 parts, the one that's going into the groove and the other that's of course on the tongue. Now I will tell you that the tongue side will come out quite easily because that's just locked in there with the pressure when it was put in. The groove side, however, will have to be pried out, and that's going to take a little bit more work. And I will talk a little bit about that in another video here as I walk through it. It's the only way you're going to be able to pry that board out without damaging the other boards that you're going to be leaving. With that as a background, let me go back to the video of the actual project.
All right, so I've got the first piece pulled out. You'll notice this has some pretty unique nails in it. I've never seen that kind of flooring nail before, but it's not going anywhere. But again, the good thing is, if you'll notice, I did not damage that tongue that groove, and this tongue I've kept intact as well. And that's what you want because you're going to be using that. Now, I'm taking this part out because I'm going to cut it here. This one will come out a lot easier now because I have a place to relieve it this way. But then when I go to the next one over here, that's going to be a different story. So again, some of these are going to come out easier than others. This one here, we'll be able to, once I take it all the way back and get that piece done, it's going to come out a little bit easier. So the first few initially are going to be tough, and then when you have ones that are sandwiched in, you're going to have to do that relief cut, but you get the idea. So I'm going to start working my way back. It's going to be a lot of work, but I want to do it right. So here we go. Okay, so we got a good start here. Just kind of want to walk through a little bit here of what we're doing. So as you can tell here, my initial two cuts were fairly narrow, but then I started realizing why not make a wider cut. So if you can see this piece here, this is what I cut out afterwards, because it doesn't matter, I'm throwing that piece away. So I cut quite a bit of it out. Now, just a couple comments here. Make sure when you're prying wood out that you're conscious about what you're prying against. And what I mean by that is this board's gonna stay. So I had to be really careful not to damage it when I was pulling it out. I was hitting it that way. And the other thing I would do is I'd take a chisel and put the chisel in the board like this and beat it, and that would pull the nails out. They put plenty of nails in this thing and they're pretty tight, but with that extra gap, I can move things around. And if you'll notice, my tongue and grooves that I need to leave are doing really good. They're in good shape. So I just cleaned this up so you can see it and get an idea. And by the way, you can see I got my saw cut a little bit too deep, so I'm gonna shallow that up a little bit because I don't need to cut that deep. All right, that's the process. Okay, I've got one side done. This is a lot of work, you guys, but it will pay off. You can see I've got all the ends cut. Had to end up right over here on the far right. I had to go straight across because a piece of that broke on me. It was too small, but otherwise it's looking pretty good. Got everything cut, squared off. A couple of things when you're pulling the piece out of here, this is where the nail is, right? You can't just come straight up. Pry on the end and then pry kind of up and away, and that will help you. And cutting those big gaps in the middle really, really helps. So one side done, and much more to go. Okay, so I've got both sides done with the exception of one little piece over there, the back there. I've got to, I couldn't get my skill saw in there, so I'm gonna have to do a little more work with my multi-tool. The only problem is my bit is so dull, I need to get a new one. So, but there it is. With this as my starting point now, I will be able to begin putting in my pieces. And that's what we'll talk about next, is how you begin to install the pieces and what you have to do to cut and make some cuts in order that the pieces will go into their spaces correctly. So we'll talk about that next. Now, obviously, when this floor was first laid, they went in row by row, right? So they started here and they just worked their way along, and they added another layer, another row, and they worked their way over. I'm going to stop the video here because what happened soon after this is that the video stopped recording. I must have accidentally touched the stop recording while I was videotaping this. So let me explain here the concept of what we're going to do. You will notice that I already have the first piece in. Now, this piece I had to rip down because it was narrower, and that was because the flooring actually began in the kitchen and came through, and they had to rip this piece down. So I did that. Obviously, there was nothing difficult about doing this. I simply cut the ends and installed it. Now, I had to nail it down through the actual board itself. The next board is going to be difficult, and this is where it's going to require some cutting. You will notice on the right side of the board that I'm going to put in, that I need to put in, there is no way that I could slip in a tongue and groove piece because, of course, it's all enclosed. And I don't have enough room to slide it in from the left side into the right. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to cut off the lower portion of the groove on the right side of the new board that I cut in. And that will allow me to put the tongue in and slide it down, and that groove will be gone so it will lay flat down. Let me demonstrate that to you. Okay, this is a picture of the piece that I have already cut and ready to install, but I want to point out a couple of things. If you will notice that the bottom part of the groove on the right side, where it had to slip in, of course, to that area, has been cut out. And I'll show you how I did that on the table saw in a video coming up. But basically what you do is you measure your length, of course, the total length, and then you measure how much
of the groove you need to cut off, and you mark that on the board, and then you go ahead and cut the groove off, and then you dry fit it. And you're going to see me do that here. But that bottom part of the groove has to be cut off in order for it to slide in place. The next series of videos will show you how I mark the board, how I cut each of the ends off, and then how I went about cutting off the groove on each of the boards.
Okay, just a tip when you're marking this piece here that I need to put in, if you'll notice here, is 25 3/8. That's the total length. And I've also marked that there's 3 inches of the lip I need to take off over the camera. 3 inches of the lip I need to take off over here. And what I do is in order to make sure I don't mess it up, I go ahead and mark this here, mark the 3 inches at the side I need to take it off. So always have the groove side towards you, and that will save you from making some of the wrong cuts.
One point of clarification here. You measure the board, in this case it was 25 3/8, and you measure that there was 3 inches of the groove you need to cut off. But remember, you need to first cut the board to length and make your bevel cuts on each side, which we'll explain later. Then you measure the 3 inches that you need to take off and then cut that part of the groove off. And that'll be explained here in the videos coming.
I want to show you a quick trick with regards to your miter saw when you're cutting this. And more normally your miter saw is going to go straight up and down, right? Well, in order to have these pieces slide in better, the concept is to cut this end when you cut it, but to cut it at a slight angle beginning at the top and then cut down like this. That's exaggerated, obviously. But what you would do is you'd go to your miter and you just put a little bit, you can probably see here, I've just got a little bit past 0. And what that's going to do is that when you're sliding the board in place, the piece of flooring in place, it's going to allow it to slide in and it won't mess up the edge on the the existing flooring. So just a hint in order to help when getting the boards put in place. Now what I've done here is I marked the piece I want to take off, and I took my multi-tool and I just cut a notch in here. You can see I cut a notch down there, and I'm going to rip this part off here. So make sure you do that. In order to make sure you know where to stop, flip it over like this and just make a note on the top just with a pencil. That's how far you want to go. Now you're going to go a little bit further. Obviously you want to leave as much of this groove on as possible in order to have as much available for the tongue for the other piece that's going to attach to it. The last thing I did was I actually put marks on my fence that indicated where the blade first came out of the table, so I can see, because obviously the blade's going to be hidden when I'm running the piece of flooring through, so I need to know exactly how far I can go before I'm too far. So that will help me as I walk this piece of wood flooring through. The last part is making sure that you've got the fence set the right distance so that it'll just take the bottom part of that groove off. So you can see here I've just got enough, but you want to make sure to take it all off. You got to take it all the way down to the depth, because if you don't, you're going to run into some problems with the tongue on the existing piece of wood hitting it. So make sure you get that right. Okay, so what you can see here is I've got the strip. I took it all the way down and you can see it came right to there. What I'll do is I'll take my multi-tool and I'll trim that, and it should come right off there. And by the way, I went just a little bit in on that. That's not a problem. It's very minimal. You just don't want to go too far in. So we'll do that, trim it, and we'll be ready to go and to install it. So this is the completed piece. So you can see that I've taken off the bottom part of the groove, trimmed it right there. The rest of the groove is still there. I've left, of course, this totally, because that's going to hook into the tongue over there in the corner. And when I cut these, I mitered them at a slight angle so the piece will fall in better. So let's get it installed. Now the first thing I want to do is dry fit this because I'm going to be gluing the bottom as well. So I need to make sure this dry fits in well. So I start in there, and you notice I can feel it going down. Now, it's not going down all the way here, but I'll be able to convince that with a rubber mallet. So make sure you have a rubber mallet. But you can see that's going to do it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this out. I'm going to run a bead of liquid nails. You can use glue, whatever you want, but right down the center.
Also make sure to put a bead of the liquid nails on each end as well.
And then I'm going to go ahead and put it in place, tap it down, and nail it. Okay, well, things are going pretty well. I've got 3 pieces in. And one comment I want to make is when you have to rip like that groove off over there, obviously you're going to have to set your saw up, your table saw up, to move the fence over, okay? Just so that's kind of a no-brainer, but I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. Now, I'm at my first piece now that has, that goes in between the 2 boards on both sides. So if you'll notice here, it's got to go in there and here. Well, all I'm going to do is, the only difference I'm going to do here is I'm going to take that lip off of both sides, right? So I still measure, cut the piece to length, and then I'm going to mark, you know, how far it is from here to here, and then mark that so I can cut that bottom lip of the groove off there, and same thing over here. But everything else is pretty much the same. So you just walk your way through. A couple of comments here, by the way. Make sure to get them tight together as much as possible. You're going to have a little bit of gaps here and there sometimes, but just make sure that where they join stays, as of course up there it's no deal, but over here make sure it's right level there, because if that's not in line there, that means it's going to throw the next board off. So anyways, I'm going to do my first inside to inside one. See how that turns out.
One other comment here is, as I'm putting these boards in, I'm actually using my nailer to nail through that bottom lip of the groove at an angle down and of course into the flooring. So I'm doing that along that exposed bottom lip as I go. Obviously, again, glue the ends, glue that, make that one strip down the middle, and then nail down that groove, and that's what's going to hold it. You want to make sure to have as few nails going through the top of the boards as you can.
Okay, we're working our way back and it's going really well. You can see I've got the pieces pieced in, going along one at a time, doing exactly what I was talking about, cutting the edges off. By the way, every once in a while you're going to have a piece like this, which you don't have to rip any part of the groove off, which works really good. Just a couple things I want to point out. The first thing is over in these corners, when I cut these, I cut them with that multi-tool, that vibrating multi-tool, and you'll notice a little piece will get caught down there. Well, that would technically interfere with the groove, or the tongue on the new piece. So what I've been doing is just cutting away that little bit of the tongue on that edge, just like maybe a 1/4 inch back, and that is allowing that to be okay, meaning it won't interfere. So in that little bit of the tongue that you cut off is not going to make that much of a difference. So just keep that in mind. And the other thing is, any debris that's in here, make sure that's totally cleared out, because that's going to inhibit when it goes in. So make sure that's all cleared out. Otherwise, it's going well. Oh, and one more thing. When you put these in, glue the ends of these boards. Put some glue on that, and then when you put them in, that will help keep it in place. All right, we'll keep going. Okay, so we're at the end of the run here, and we're putting the last one in. Just a tip that I've learned in this, it seemed like the wood was getting tighter the further I went along, and so when I went to push it down here, it really hung up on that lip, and so it took a lot of beating to get it there. Now, one thing I did on these last couple is I took the piece, like this piece here is going to go right here, right? But what I did is on the bottom lip here, normally that is like totally square. Let's see if I can get it. Normally that's totally squared off. But what I did is I took my multi-tool and I just cut that edge off and made it kind of triangular. And that's going to help when I put it in here and then I go to push down. it's going to help it anywhere where it's touching. Of course, in this piece, it's touching all the way along. But it will just help a little bit there when you're putting that in. You don't have to take much off, just enough to start it, and then hopefully you can persuade it to go in. Another thing I've heard people do is put paraffin wax on these edges, and then when they beat it down, it'll go a little bit smoother. So just a couple of tips if you're having trouble getting that board to go down next to the other boards. Okay, so we've got all the pieces in. And now, and by the way, this last piece was really hard. I mean, it went in, but it was tough. So I think the wood is a little bit greener than the others. So anyway, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna sand it down level. I'm using a belt sander with an 80 grit belt on it, just to get the main stuff down, because there's some pretty decent lips on here. So I'm gonna start on this side, work my way this way, and then I'm gonna finish off with a palm sander, or an oscillating sander actually, that will help finish it probably with 180 or 120, probably 180. So we're gonna get started. Okay, so I've sanded the floor down. Now what I did basically is I started by the wall and I used 80 grit, and I used it with my belt sander first. You saw the belt sander earlier. And then I did 80 grit with this oscillating sander here. And basically the biggest thing I had to do was take down some of the boards that were a little higher. So that's where the belt sander came in handy. And then eventually finished my feathering with the oscillating sander. So, and then I went over the whole thing with 120 grit just to smooth it out, and it actually turned out pretty good. So I vacuumed it really cleanly, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, and any gaps or cracks I have, like that there, I'm going to go ahead and putty it and let that dry. And this is the wood putty that I've got. This is a plastic wood, all-purpose wood filler. And you'll notice that I got what's called a golden oak, so you can get this to match the type of flooring and stain that you're going to be using. So this is what I'm going to be using to fill the cracks in, and I'll just be using a putty knife to do that. Okay, so I did all the sanding. Again, I started with 80 grit on a belt sander, got these high spots down, went over with the oscillating sander with 80 grit, feathered everything out. Then I went to 120, went over everything once. Then what I did is I did the putting, and you guys already saw, I showed you what the putty was, and I did all that. And now I've got 220 on the oscillating sander, and I'm starting to go through, and you can see it does a really nice job to sand off all the excess putty. So I'm going to do this and finish this with 220, and then we will go and begin cleaning it up and then starting the staining process. All right, so we have finished the sanding, and again, if you'll notice, pretty much what we did is we just took off all the putty, except of course where it went into the cracks. So we just sanded it down. So I've gone over the whole thing with 220. It's nice and smooth. And now we're gonna start with the stain. And you will notice, by the way, that the wood itself, as you put the stain on, based upon the actual wood grain, it's gonna stain at different, different degrees of hues and such. So I'm not too worried about that, but I'm just gonna start the staining process, and then we'll see how it looks. Okay, so this is the stain that I'm using. I took an old piece of the flooring and took it into Home Depot, and they matched it up with this. So it's a golden oak. And we've finished the first coat. It actually turned out pretty nice already. It's still a little bit light. We only put one coat of stain on so far. You can see some of it's a little redder than others, but you can start to see it's now coming together. The great thing is there is no pattern that indicates where this wall was. It's all been threaded in. And so it's turning out pretty good. So you can tell from here, but again, we're gonna do one more coat of stain. But overall, pretty pleased with the way it's turning out.
Okay, so I'm going to complete this video by just showing a couple of still pictures and then a video of the final completed project. I ended up putting 4 coats of stain on these new boards and 2 light layers of polyurethane. And again, my primary goal was to get the patch in so you couldn't tell where the wall was. I'm going to have the floors professionally refinished in about a year. So I really just needed to get the patch done correctly, and it really turned out well. So let me show you a video of the final completed project.
Okay, so I want to just show you what the final result of the repair looks like. So this now is one room, and as you can see, we've got the repairs done here. This is the side that I was showing you, and that's basically how it turned out. I'm eventually going to have the floors completely professionally refinished, so I'm not too worried if it didn't match totally. I'll be honest, you really have to look for it to be able to see the repair that I made, but that's how it turned out. That's how it looked. The ceiling, you can see, had the ceiling redone as well. And everything turned out really, really well. So, very happy with the repair. It was a heck of a lot of work, but it paid off. So, I really hope this video helped you. If it did, I would appreciate if you subscribe to my channel and watch some more of the Right to the Point DIY. Thanks, everybody.